Hello friends, Mr. E here, and today is a pretty massive undertaking. This is going to be the state of the game, the state of Darktide, and where I currently believe it stands. Is it a good game? Is it a bad game? Is it balanced? Is it broken? Is it fun, and does it have a future? All of that will be addressed in this video. I'm going to be attempting to cover pretty much everything about the game, from in-game gameplay sort of stuff to the balance of weapons and classes to more metagame things such as how the game is funded through microtransactions and the general management of the studio. So all that will be covered within this video. If you're a new player, probably a really good overview to understand what game you're getting into. Like Darktide is a great game, but it is not perfect by any means. And oh boy, today are we going to be talking about a lot of those flaws that it has. For a more veteran player, you could just be nodding your head along if you've been paying attention this entire time and you literally have never logged out of Darktide. But for a lot of players, myself included at times, taking a couple months break with Darktide, you can feel like you missed a lot. And so I'll be going over pretty much everything that has evolved throughout all of 2025 and puts us here at the very first part of 2026, where I anticipate that this will be sort of the jumping off point for the year. I think we're pretty close to having a reveal for the first major update of the year, and then it's off to the races from there. And we'll see you back here for the second annual State of the Union, State of the Goonion next year in early 2027. But with that being said, let's talk about what I'm going to be covering in the video so you have an idea of what to look for. I'm going to be breaking down the content in the game into 5 major categories, and you can find those time-stamped down below if you really only want to hear about one, but I think this is much better viewed as a comprehensive thesis paper. Now, the first category I want to cover is weaponry and the balance and blessings thereof. Then I'll be talking about classes and their balance. Then I will go to talking about the enemies and the difficulty rankings that we have in the game, difficulty scaling. Then we will cover content, meaning what can you play, what can you do in the game, is there different game modes, is there different challenges, penances, and stuff like that. And then we'll wrap up with miscellaneous, everything. This is the catch-all category that will cover things talking about the microtransactions, talking about the progression systems, talking about the player experience in general, leveling, etc. So that's what you can expect to see in the video. And I acknowledge, even without knowing how long it's going to be yet, because I'm trying to do this as much in one take as I can. Good luck to me on that, but it's going to be a long video, right? And I understand that the human attention span is a finite thing. Believe me, I really do, being an ADHD brother myself. So in that spirit, to help make this a more digestible video, this video is intended to be played podcast style. There's not going to be anything on the screen that is integral to your understanding of what I'm saying. I'm not going to be showing graphs or anything like that. This is a perfect video to put on your second monitor and continue doing whatever fucking spreadsheets or something you do for work. You can put it on your AirPods while you do the dishes or whatever else you might be doing. You could simply just space out and use it to fall asleep if you like, as an ASMR video. Those are coming from members soon, by the way. So yeah, that's what the video is going to be. And before I jump into actually giving information and starting the video forthright, let me go ahead and plug the channel. If you like this sort of video, if it's a cool concept to you, or if you've enjoyed it in the past and you haven't yet subscribed for some reason, you should definitely be subscribed. This is something I really love to do here, and hopefully you love it too. And for those of you who really want to support me and help me keep making Darktide content, help me make this my full-time job, and have the means to do it, of course, the best way to do that is by becoming a channel member. There's a ton of benefits to becoming channel members, not least of which is getting extra pictures of my cute little boy Bernie. But you also get tons of member-exclusive videos, and I've got a lot more members-exclusive content planned for this year. I'm going to be doubling and tripling down on that concept, so I hope you members feel like you're getting value out of your subscriptions. And for those of you who are already members to the channel, thank you so much for your support, and a extra special thank you to Elise and to Neva, who are my best friends. for their support. Okay, guys, well, with everything said there, let's begin the game forthright. The video forthright. And I'm going to give my major overview. This is the thesis statement at the beginning of the paper, where I talk about how I feel Darktide is doing currently, the state of the game. Currently, Darktide, in my conception, is at a moment on the precipice. It is at a crucial junction that will decide its future development in a number of different ways. The first and most obvious way that most players will care about is where the balance goes from here. Are we going to be seeing a doubling down on what we saw last year, which is the enemies and the way the game is played and the tempo of the game have gotten very, very intense and very crazy. More than a year ago, about 15 months or so ago, the Havoc endgame mode didn't exist. The game was very, very easy by comparison. Now there is such intensity that it's kind of like shocking to look back at some of the older footage that I have and see how tame the game was back then. At the same time, our characters also grew in power astronomically. The character player power is really, really insane, and I could see them doubling down on that, but I could also see them pumping the brakes and realizing they've gone a bit too far in this direction and they want to bring it back to a more tame and balanced state. Both are on the table, and this year I think will really tell us which direction Fatshark is going to go here. The second thing that I think a lot of players are worried about, and that will be shown this year, I think starting pretty early on, is how invested is Fatshark, the studio who develops Darktide, in Darktide. Darktide had a pretty dang good year last year, I would say. Even though there wasn't a whole lot of additional content, there was 2 new classes, which was a massive increase in the, stuff that we got throughout the updates in the year, and I imagine those did generate a lot of revenue for them. So do they sort of double down on this strategy? Do they produce more and more content throughout this year to really draw players back because they realize that they can get players into this game if they have good, solid releases and they can make a lot of profit and stuff doing it? Or do they keep to the current status quo, release just about as much this year as they did last year, and then they can work more on their future projects, the next game beyond Darktide, which I anticipate will be revealed, sometime relatively soon. Remains to be seen, right? But that is what I'm saying about this being a very transitory state, being a year of many decisions. We had a big growth year last year in 2025, and 2026 has great potential, but that potential is volatile. It could go a lot of different directions, and I believe we'll find out very soon. With that being said, let's talk about where we are currently at this moment in time and give a little bit of an overview of last year, and we'll start with the first topic I mentioned, which is the weaponry. Because weaponry is a very isolated topic, it's very easy to discuss weapons. Weapons exist across class, many of them, and therefore they are applicable to everybody. But weaponry, as I said, has a decision to make this year as well. A lot of this game is split between the haves and have-nots. We have in the weaponry category a big host of weapons that are doing very, very well for themselves, that can accomplish all content in the game, and they have use cases that, they make themselves suitable for various builds. There's a lot of diverse ways to play with them, and they feel good to play with. They're rewarding, and they are sort of the best at doing one particular thing at least. Those are the weapons that are succeeding in Darktide currently. I'm certain that you can envision a couple of them that are feeling good, that are doing good right now. Then on the other end, the ones that I'm very worried about, and the ones that I think are going to need help this year, there is a host of weapons that have fallen very far behind the curve of the game. The weapons that I oftentimes refer to as Darktide 1.0 weapons, who were designed for a very early balanced state of the game where there wasn't this magic power, basically, the crazy blessings and perks and talents, and the talent trees didn't even exist, and these weapons were maybe strong at the time when the game was much more slow paced, but now we are seeing that they just do not have the juice to compete with the current energy of the game. I'm certain that you guys can also picture what I'm talking about there, but just as a few examples, we have melee weapons like the heavy sword, we have range weapons like the vigilant auto guns, these weapons, you can clear games with them, right? And you can clear high-level games with them as well, although it's going to be a massive endeavor for you to do it. These weapons need a lot of help because they are being overshadowed entirely by other weapons that exist. So if you were a heavy sword player, there's almost literally no reason to use the heavy sword when the Katachan Devil's Claw exists. It just does what the heavy sword does, plus it has this amazing parry attack. So even a weapon like the Devil's Claw, where a year ago I would have said that this weapon, it needs to full rework and it's garbage, well, this year it got a really, really powerful parry attack that's made it quite useful. And yeah, it fits well with a couple of different builds, and I think it's a strong contender to exist in the game currently. I can't say the same about a host of weapons. A lot of those weapons are within the range category as well, where many, many bullet weapons are falling behind that power curve. This is a topic that I made a video on earlier in the year to talk about how bullet-based weapons are very much lacking in the game right now, where many of the best range weapons are energy-based weapons, are energy or explosions or flame-based weapons of some sort, and the lower contenders are things like the infantry autoguns, the infantry las guns, which aren't technically bullets, but hey, you know, they're infantry guns, and then the vigilant autoguns and the braced autoguns. All those exist at the very bottom of the power structure and need a lot of help. The thing that worries me about balancing these weapons is because, of course, these weapons exist across multiple classes, including the Hive Scum. If you were to, for instance, buff the base damages and make these weapons really crazy powerful, well, the Hive Scum is a class who is uniquely equipped to use these range weapons incredibly well, and he could take them and run with them to, just insane lengths. So how do you go about buffing these weapons and making them more useful without letting your most powerful user of these weapons get too carried away? Remains to be seen. On the melee spectrum, this is probably where more of that sort of, how do I say this? The uniqueness of weapons has a much more strong effect. There are many melee weapons that exist right now that have pretty poor stats or might have unusual like movesets. However, they have access to really good blessings or traits or synergies, and so they're retaining their use there. The main thing that is a problem for our melee weapon roster is that there is a massive bias in this game towards incredibly fast attacking, high critical ratio weapons, where almost all of the best melee weapons in the game have absurd attack speed and really high synergy with getting crits. That means things like the dueling sword, the dagger, the shivs from the Hive Scum, all of these are the Force Greatsword, right? These weapons not only produce a lot of critical chance by themselves, but also they get a huge boost when crits are hit, and with many classes in the game currently, critical rates are sitting at above 50%. For everybody except for Ogren, critical rates are about 50% or more. So crits are incredibly strong in the game right now, and it's something that is kind of imbalancing a lot of these weapons that are designed to be heavy-hitting, slow-attacking weapons that don't have access to crits. So my personal opinion on it is that there is a roster of weapons that in the melee category that are just not able to compete because of the prevalence of critical builds. And how important attack speed is. This is things like the Crusher, the Thunderhammer, right? These weapons are usable, however, you're going to get better results with most other weapons. Slow attacking weapons lose out big time in Darktide right now. So when I talk about the categories of weapons, as I see it, there's a low category that needs big buffs, there's a middle category that's doing really well for themselves, and then there's a very exclusive upper category that's doing too well for the game. There are about a half dozen, maybe a little more, maybe it's less than 10 weapons, I would say, that are problematic for the game right now, and just don't have a correct level of balance to give players like reasonable options to choose other things, on the class. Starting at the very top of this would be obviously the Flame Staff. This is an unlimited ammo, suppressing, staggering, flamethrower weapon that has perfect synergy with a ton of talents within the Psyker's tree and melts everything. It can grab synergy with Uncanny Strike, which is a broken blessing that exists on the melee weapons on the class, and just single-handedly does more damage per second than any other weapon in the game, and is very, very easy to use. And then other weapons in this category include things like the plasma gun. We've got the dual shivs on the Hive Scum, the needle pistol on the Hive Scum, the dueling sword, the single dagger, the Katachan combat blade, and then, kind of a little bit lower down, I would say that the Arbides shock ball is probably up there, and maybe the Ogren slab, although I don't want to advise the Ogren gets any nerfs at all. But the overwhelming majority of those weapons are overpowered because they can combat many, many enemies at once. They are very, very simple to use. They don't have any true weaknesses. They are fairly effective against both bosses, hordes, and elites, and for the vast majority of them, they have no regard for armor. And armor, as we'll talk about when we get to the enemies section, is one of the biggest determining factors in whether a weapon is good or not in the game right now. Specifically, one enemy, the Crusher, is sort of a gatekeeper who says, hey, if you don't have any weapons that can kill this guy, or something in your kit that can kill this guy, then you aren't going to be able to be in the upper category. And that's a really, really big sort of problem for a lot of these weapons. So in terms of conceptualizing what an ideal weapon for Darktide would be currently, I think the one that I will harken back to over and over again is the Relic Blade. The Relic Blade is a powerful weapon that has enough armor penetration, enough horde clear, a very good amount of boss damage, right? But it does have its limitations. It requires understanding its moveset, which is quite complicated. It requires having an awareness of when to power it up and when to not have a power up. It has limited dodges and slow movement speed. So to get the power that it has, you must make big, big trade-offs. And I think that is something that a lot of the absolute upper echelon of weapons are sorely lacking, is they have very uncomplicated movesets, and raw power is really all they bring. Things like the dueling sword, which fortunately did get a nerf throughout 2025. It saw a nerf which brought it down from being the absolute god king of all weapons in the game to being, behind the absolute top, but still in that top echelon. It is just incredibly simple to use and play with effectively. I yearn for a meta, I yearn for a balance state where the best weapon in the game is only the best weapon in the game if you are mechanically skilled. It will be a pretty good weapon, but as you get mechanically more skilled with it, it becomes the best possible weapon. That is the sort of a balance state that I would really like to see in Darktide. And unfortunately, right now, the best contenders in the game are all incredibly simple mechanically, just spam the same 2, maybe 3 attacks over and over and over again to massive results. So my overall recommendations to Fatshark, or what I really hope to see this year, is first and foremost, the lower host of weapons needs massive, massive buffs. I don't think it would be too crazy to see a 50 to 100% increase in the damage on a lot of these weapons, plus maybe looking at adding some better ratios, some better movesets, whatever it might be. The fear that a lot of players will have is, oh no, this is power creep. But remember that power creep, especially among weapons, is really only going to be defined by the absolute upper sort of peak of the weapons. So if we double the Thunderhammer's damage, right, is that going to make it a better weapon than the dual shivs on the Hive Scum? No, there's no way. The Thunderhammer has too many downsides to have raw damage bring it up to that level. So remember that we have these incredibly, incredibly powerful weapons that still exist. If we buff other stuff, you can only choose one weapon at a time. Sure, it'll make the weapon roster on the whole more powerful, but it will just make those weapons much more of a viable option to the incredibly powerful stuff that currently exists. For my money, I would also like to see the top 10 or so weapons brought down a bit, and then get them more in line with where the Relic Blade is currently at, which I would think would be a great top line for potential power in the future. Before we wrap up talking about weapons, we need to talk about blessings, because those are sort of a lot of the power of certain weapons. And that is potentially a problem, but I think it's much better viewed as a solution to a lot of the balancing issues, at least in the short term. We can take some of the best blessings of the game and move them onto these lesser competitive weapons. There are blessings that are incredibly good in Darktide right now. I'm certain that you know a couple of them, at least one of them, Uncanny Strike, which gives rending, armor penetration to a lot of the most powerful weapons of the game, like the dagger, like the shivs, like the dueling sword. They all get Uncanny Strike, and therefore they can basically crack open the most dangerous melee enemy, the Crusher, very easily. This also boosts your boss damage against unyielding types of enemies. So yeah, these are incredibly powerful blessings. We've also got things like Skull Crusher, Shred, Riposte. Those sort of blessings, if they were moved to other weapons, if they were given to the lower members in the roster, that could do a lot to moving those weapons up. At the same time, we do have these weapons that are overpowered, right? We have weapons that are just performing too well and have too many synergies within the classes. Removing those incredibly powerful blessings from them could seek to equalize the state of affairs. So something that a lot of people were suggesting about the dueling sword when it was in its earlier state of power was that if we just remove Uncanny Strike from it, it will still be an incredibly impactful weapon. However, it won't be able to one or two shot a Crusher, and therefore will have an actual counter. They decided against doing that, and they decided instead to balance the weapon differently in terms of its base stats, but just by changing some blessings, we could effectively change a lot without having to invest a lot of resources and time in going back and retooling the actual numbers and the feels and the weapon sort of moves on all of the roster in the game, because there's about 70 weapons total. A lot of this could also go a long way towards helping to rebalance our range weapon roster. A lot of that is going to come down to just some base number changes, though. For range weapons, there's a lot less intricacy and detail and uniqueness that can be brought than with the melee weapons, because most of a range weapon comes down to how many enemies can you kill with the ammo supply that you have on hand. If you're wasting a lot of ammo and you're not getting very many kills, it's generally not a very good range weapon. So we need to be striving to get every range weapon at least to some level of parity. From that perspective, there's no reason we should have vigilant auto guns and braced auto guns that are only able to kill a few like enemies every 10 seconds, and they use an absolute buttload of ammo to do it, especially like the braced auto guns and the infantry auto guns really do. So they need a lot of help to help compete in that front, and I think changing blessings around would be a great step in the right direction. In terms of, do I think there's any blessings that deserve to be removed from the game? At the current juncture, I know a lot of people make a big deal about Uncanny Strike. We could certainly see Uncanny Strike reduced in its efficacy, like they have done on the new dual shivs for the Hive Scum, but the number of weapons that is still really problematic on is pretty few. The only reason that I think Uncanny Strike is still a problem gameplay-wise is because it applies a buff to your character, and that can roll over and apply to your damage over time effects. So what you'll see is that bleed stacks and burn stacks, especially soul blaze stacks from Psyker, can be boosted in damage massively by stacking Uncanny Strike, and that allows Psyker, who would normally have a weakness with the Flame Staff against Carapace and very tanky enemies like that, to get a huge boost to their Soul Blaze damage by just simply swinging some attacks and hitting those headshots, which is probably not fair and balanced. So if we could make that not apply to your bleeds and not apply your damage over time effects, which is already an incredibly powerful way to play the game, then we could see some rebalancing there. Also, when I'm talking about range weapons here, or when I'm talking about weapons in general here, and I'm speaking of damage types and damage over time effects, damage over time has very problematic implications for Darktide, right? Darktide is a game where I believe it is best played actually actively interacting with the enemies and fighting them directly. Applying things like bleeds and stuff when you get critical hits, that makes sense to me. Weapons that can apply, however, tons of burn stacks and do thousands upon thousands of damage from range, or for instance the Tox Pistol, which can kill a Crusher in like 2 to 3 shots with very little effort, which can just simply push a boss to 30 stacks of toxin and deal 75% of their HP in a matter of 10 or 15 seconds. I don't believe that these weapons are balanced, and I don't believe that they feel good to play with because they are non-interactive, right? When you can shoot an enemy with one bullet and watch them take several thousand damage to toxin, that to me doesn't really scream a fun or interactive gameplay style. So I would be fully in support of reducing the effectiveness of damage over time effects. They can still serve their purpose in helping to contribute to boss damage. They can still serve their purpose in helping to erase hordes and low health enemies, but they shouldn't be the predominant way in which many builds are doing all of their damage, unless you are making big sacrifices to your like raw damage in order to get them. But that's my overview and my thoughts on where weapons stand currently. We just need a lot of buffs to start things off. Then maybe we can look at bringing some of the absolute higher outliers down, so we have a more equal choice and a free choice to be made between the weapons that we currently have in the game. With that being said, let's move on to talk about classes, because classes are what weapons are associated with, right? And weapons are the conduit for class power. If you got a really good weapon, it can multiply the power of your class. It can channel a 10% damage buff on your class. If you can hit 3 enemies at the same time, that's 10% extra damage on 3 enemies. If your class can get 50% crit and your weapon multiplies all crits by 4 times in terms of damage, wow, that's a really big return on investment. So that's where this interlacing between the weapons and the classes comes into play, is because the better your class's base stats are and the better weapons they have access as a conduit for dealing that onto enemies, well then the bigger numbers you're going to pull. And this is where I'll get into talking about my main theory, my main thesis about classes right now, which is the caster problem for Darktide. I recently made a video to talk about this, how Darktide has encountered the classic D&D caster problem, also known as the linear fighter quadratic wizard. The same thing applies here in Darktide. We have the linear heavy sword, we have the quadratic flame staff, right? That's the same thing with the weapons. But for classes, we also see this distinction. We have 2 sets of 3 classes in my evaluation, and if you want to go and watch my larger videos where I break down, why I think classes are as powerful as they are, well, you're welcome to do that, but I'll give you my overview here. Currently, at the bottom of the roster, I believe we have Ogryn pretty solidly at the bottom, followed up by a kind of a tie between Arbites and Zealot. Then we have a pretty big gulf before we get to our third, second, first place characters. At third, I would place the Hive Scum, but only just barely. Then second place is the Veteran. The Veteran is only in this position because he still has access to just infinite grenades, which is very powerful, and he has his shout. His voice of command ability has not been nerfed in the way that it would need to be in order to bump him down. That gold shout is so freaking good. And then at first place is the Psyker, who has access to not only some really crazy powerful talents, but some of the best ultimate abilities in the game with incredibly short cooldowns, and then has exclusive weapons that are the most powerful in the game. So we have to tie in things like the Flame Staff and casting for free. That sort of stuff gets tied into the core power of the class because it is associated with the class. Just as for the Hive Scum, we will talk about his power with things like the Needle Pistol, his power with things like the Rocket Launcher. So why are these classes so distinct in my mind, and why is that a problem? The reason these classes are distinct is because when we look at the lower set of 3 characters, these are martial classes. They do their damage through bludgeoning stuff, through physical prowess. They will have to hit enemies over and over and aim for heads, get better, better action uptime, be doing more things, and in order to combat more and more enemies. If you are tasked with killing a bunch of elite enemies, especially ones with lots of armor or bulwarks with shields, those enemies are going to pose a really big challenge for you because they take a lot of effort to kill, and you can generally only kill one at a time. These classes do have powerful abilities, don't get me wrong, right? The Arbites has a 10-second charge, which gives him a lot of power. He's also got some pretty good blitzes. He's got the dog, or not the dog. He's got good keystones, at least 2 good keystones, right? He's powerful. He's got good weapons. The Ogren has taunt, and he's got the slab shield, and that's kind of his thing right now. That's pretty much what he's got. And the Zealot is nigh unkillable and can provide some incredibly good boss damage. He's a solid character all around. However, when it comes to fighting your fights, I'd like you to imagine a hypothetical fight with me for a second here, and we'll kind of mentally explore how this would go down. Yeah, I'm certain you have probably been in the situation where the game summons 10 to 15 bulwarks on you, and then that's backed up by ragers and stuff that are hiding behind the bulwarks. How would those 3 classes deal with this issue? The answer is slowly and painfully, right? I'm certain we've all been playing as a Zealot, and we have just gotten stopped in our tracks by 5 bulwarks who just will not put those stupid shields down, and you're waiting forever for an opening, and that is all slowing down your potential of killing everything else, and it's just an absolute pain to get the damage done. Certainly you could drop an immolation grenade, certainly you could drop a stun grenade and get some damage done there, but those are expendable resources that you will not get back in all likelihood. Same thing applies to the Ogren. You can taunt and maybe get a couple of these guys hit, but they'll block you all the rest of the day. We can use some ammo if we've got Rumbler or something to knock them down, but that's very limited. Same thing with, again, the Arbites. He will be able to kill this stuff, especially if he has like a shock mine or something handy, but it will take him a very long time to do it, because the vast majority of the way he's going to be killing these enemies is by hitting them in the face with his mauls. Now, if we swap over to the other 3 classes, we see a night and day difference in how they would approach a situation like this. For the Hive Scum, it would be as simple as waiting for these enemies to be opened very slightly and then shooting them 1 or 2 times with the Tox Pistol apiece, or dropping a single Tox Grenade or a Rocket Launcher, which would instantly end both of those engagements. He can just like sneak out so much more damage. I think the Zealot is pretty comparable in terms of the ability to burst one of these enemies if they opened up their shield, but mostly what I will point out for the Hive Scum is the ability to just use that Tox Pistol, to use his blitzes to end this engagement. He's got also got infinite blinders, which can stun these guys and get them open. For the Veteran, the situation is even simpler. The Veteran has Shout, which can put all these enemies on the ground. He does have an infinite capacity to regenerate grenades, so both crack grenades and shredder grenades would just annihilate a pack of bulwarks like this. He's got the Plasma Gun, which shoots directly through bulwarks and can kill them outright without even needing them to open their defense. And then, of course, the Psyker has the easiest time of this of all, simply just continuing to shoot everything with the Flame Staff, or the Void Blast Staff, or the Electrokinetic Staff, or Smite, or Venting Shriek, or Head Pop, or like literally almost every one of his weapons. Even if you were using a melee Psyker and you had the Force Greatsword, you could use the Warp Shock Slash in order to cut through all of them and deal some massive damage and kill it all. So yeah, all of those characters, you see how they have options that are outside of just meleeing these enemies in order to kill them. And that is the ultimate difference here. The lower tier classes, the martial classes, and the upper tier classes, they share a very similar baseline in their abilities. All these classes move at relatively the same movement speed. All of them can do relatively similar amounts of melee damage. You know, the Hive Scum and the Veteran and the Zealot all exist within the same sphere of how much melee damage they can do, but when you take into account their various abilities, and when you take into account the extra stuff they have on top of that, including their blitzes and how powerful they are, one cohort of classes really stands out. The power of the Veteran's ultimate ability plus his crack / shredder grenades and the infinite regenerating capacity thereof, the power of the Hive Scum with his rocket and his tox grenades and his needle pistols, all of that is much higher than any individual thing that you could bring on the lower classes. And that's where the disconnect lies, is we have a set of classes that can effectively wave their hands at a big scary group of enemies and say, no, that's all gone, goodbye, forever. I shoot one rocket launcher and it's all deleted. That is a problem for the balance of the game. And let's get on my second part here, where players will say, well, it's okay if we have more powerful and less powerful classes. Some players just want to play as like this class. They don't care how powerful it is. The problem isn't necessarily for players a whole lot, excepting if you are in a game where you are you want to tank, you want to be an Ogryn. A lot of you have probably had this experience. If you want to be an Ogryn tank or an Arbites tank, and you've got someone who is playing as Hive Scum or Veteran or Psyker, and they are just killing everything, right? Because they have that level of damage output. They can erase everything from the map before it needs to ball up and be tanked at all. If they're throwing 3 crack grenades at a boss, and you brought your Thunderhammer build to kill a boss, they are negating your fun in the game, because they can kill everything from across the map before you can engage with it. And that's a very unengaging and very un-Darktide way to play the game, in my opinion. The second problem is for balancing the difficulty of the game, which we're about to talk about enemies and difficulty here in a second. So how do you balance the game and make it effectively challenging and difficult for players when you've got a set of enemies that are, or when you've got a set of characters that are capable of dispatching 24 crushers with ease, so with spending 1 rocket to kill 10 plus crushers, with holding every enemy on the map still with something like Smite, or simply immolating everything within sight with the Flame Staff, or shouting and knock everything down, and then just throwing crack grenades at everything that moves. How do you challenge a class or a team that is comprised of your allies like that? Well, you would continue to throw really, really, really big packs of scary enemies at them over and over again until they finally get overwhelmed. So you would send a pack of 12 crushers and some ragers at your enemies, and then they would shoot it with a rocket launcher. Okay, you send another. They shoot it with another rocket launcher. And you do this 2 more times, and now they're out of rocket launchers. So now you can ostensibly deal some damage to them. Oh, they got crack grenades. Okay, so we need to send double the amount and from 2 different directions, so that he can't crack grenade everything from every direction, and also throw in a boss or 2 for good measure, because he can be shooting and stuff at the same time. So we really, really need to overwhelm this team, because the amount of flak, the amount of basically artillery fire that they can bombard the enemies with is absurd. And the assumption is that 75 to 90% of all enemies that the game spawns will be just donated to the artillery characters, to the caster characters, who will blow the shit out of this stuff before it even gets remotely close. So when you're removing 75 to 90% of all enemies before they can even get to your team and try to engage them and try to damage them, well, then you're going to have to spawn a ton of stuff in order to effectively threaten this team. Now, what happens if the team doesn't have access to those same resources? What happens if the team is all martial characters? Well, then they are simply overwhelmed by that much stuff. And we can see that going on in the game today, as the game has gotten more and more intense. Playing on a Havoc game or even an Auric Maelstrom game with none of these caster characters is asking for a big problem, because the game is designed with the expectation that you'll be bringing at least one of these characters who can output this really, really high level of damage. So if you aren't bringing one of those characters, or the guy that you're with who is supposed to be playing that character is not performing properly, it's very, very easy to get overrun, because the game is currently spawning incredible amounts of stuff to try and kill us because of the amount that we can kill. So players will say, oh, please don't nerf anybody. Like, nerfing things never goes well. Like, if we nerf characters down, where does it stop? Everyone will have 1 HP eventually. We'll be able to do no damage. They'll make Psyker worthless. But at the same time, they'll complain that when enemies spawn, it's spawning 20 shotgunners at a time, and then it'll spawn 3 crushers and 10 ragers behind you. Holy fuck, why is there so many enemies? Why is there so much going on at once? Well, it's because we have classes in the game that currently can just dispatch all that stuff, no problem. And when Fatshark looks at the engagements, they look at the numbers, they can see that classes, people are still clearing these games, so that we think we can up the difficulty, right? We can make it more intense, because clearly it's too easy for them currently. And that is the real rub here, is if we want to have these insanely powerful classes, you will also be accepting tacitly that you are going to have insane levels of enemy spawns. And then, how do you feel when you are a lowly little zealot or an Ogryn or whatever, and the entire sea of enemies that is coming towards you, and you have to kill them all one at a time, right? If you're a Psyker or whoever is dispatched, and now you're just killing everything manually, you'll be there for a year. And I think that nothing has shown this sort of dichotomy better than the recent event, which was highlighting the Ogrins. It was all Ogrins. Like pretty much every roaming enemy in the map is replaced by Ogrins. So Reapers, Crushers, and Bulwarks. And then the sort of conceit on the player side is that 25% of the time you'll get a grenade charge back. So this mode is super fucking hard. Players were complaining that it was like impossible. It was super rippy. It would murder you out of nowhere because it's like the enemy packs that are spawning are absurd. However, if you just go in here and you're playing as a veteran with crack grenades, if you're playing as a hive scum with the rocket launcher, it's an automatic win because now you have access to these magic spells you can cast that erase everything. And if you go in with all 3 martial classes who don't really have access to effective grenades that can solve these problems, that can magic these problems away, well then you are asking for a absolutely hellacious time. And it really shows that problem in design, which is that yes, like extra grenades on certain classes wipe encounters. They wipe encounters and they just instantly win you the game. On other classes, they generally do nothing. And at the same time, those classes that have the rocket launchers and the crack grenades of the world, they aren't very far, if at all, are they far behind the other classes in terms of power and survivability. So where is the trade-off supposed to be? If they get all these bonus goodies to blow up every enemy in their radius, plus they get to use some of the best range and melee weapons in the game as well, plus have best ultimates, it's just not fair. It's just not equivalent. So in my approximation, what should be done about the classes this year? How should they rebalance these classes? Well, they should move up the lower classes. I think they should move them up, let's say 40%, and then they should move the higher classes down 60%. So they'll meet in the middle, but the lower classes will move up less than the higher classes move down. So Zealots, Arbites, and Ogrins will get more powerful. Psychers, Veterans, and Hive Scums will get less powerful. So everybody overall will still be roughly the same power level across the board, which will keep us relatively in balance with where the game is at currently. However, we will see a reduction in the crazy creeping power for these upper class or caster class characters, and we'll see an increase for the characters that have been struggling as the intensity of combats has gone up and up. As to how Fatshark would do this, as I was saying before, a great place to start is with weapons, especially exclusive weapons. And so we need to be taking a look at weapons that are only on certain classes, like the Flame Staff, like the Plasma Gun, like the Needle Pistol. These weapons can only be used by that specific class. So if those are the problem, if those are a big part of the problem, which they are in terms of power, then we can start with that, because that won't have any lasting effects on anything else. If they are still overpowered after their weapons are adjusted, if they're still overperforming, then and only then should we look at the actual base talents in the class. Because if you change any base talents in the class, you're changing them in a big way, a big sweeping way that it will affect lots of stuff. So that is my feelings on classes currently. And as you heard throughout that, the classes are very much up against the difficulty of the game, right? The more difficult the game gets, those caster classes scale better, and so more difficulty helps those better classes more. And so we can't discuss the class balance without discussing difficulty and enemies, and that's where we're at here. So let's talk about the enemies and how they evolved this year and how difficulty has scaled and evolved. All right, now let's talk about the enemies and the difficulty of Darktide right now, which are getting crazier by the day. The enemies over the last year or so have really stepped up their game, and they are spawning in massive numbers. The game is getting more and more challenging, and it jumped forward a lot in terms of difficulty in about fall of last year, when they removed the lowest difficulty, formerly known as Sedition, and now the highest baseline difficulty is now called Auric, so Damnation is only the 4th highest difficulty. That Auric difficulty incorporates some elements of the new Havoc game mode, which is like the end game mode, and it is quite challenging. Previously, the Auric game mode was just a modifier on top of Damnation, on top of the other modes like Heresy, and it would just enhance the number of specials and elites it would spawn. But now, as its own difficulty, it spawns extra bosses, extra specials, extra elites. Very heavy emphasis on those extra specials. It is much harder than it was, especially Auric Maelstroms are much harder than they were this time last year. I can tell because I used to be able to solo Auric Maelstroms, and now I guess I think I'm maybe a little bit washed, but the game is so hard to manage everything that's going on, everything that's trying to kill you while playing on an Auric difficulty mission now is very, very difficult as a solo player, whereas I was very easily able to manage it within Arbites after his launch. So what's happened is primarily the number of special spawns is way up. The specials are coming out in 3 times is the numbers they were before. They used to spawn in waves of about 4, and now you'll see 4 waves or 3 waves of 4. So you're getting inundated with these specials over and over and over again, and of course, one special can be the end of your game. The same thing applies to the number of elite enemies, enemies in general, and bosses. There's just so much stuff that's being pushed your way. And why is that? Well, it goes back and ties into the last 2 topics we discussed. It is because the player characters now have just immense enemy removal. We can kill so fast at this point. You can kill so much stuff and so easily and so freely that the game has to turn up those dials and really buckle down to try and confront you, to try and challenge you. If you are playing with a veteran who's using plasma gun and shout and stuff like that, you know, if you're playing according to the meta, it's getting increasingly hard for the enemies to be able to deal damage to you. And the only way a lot of times that games are failed at higher levels is because of some really bad confluence of boss spawns and horde spawns, or specials doing their thing, right? So a whole horde on its own, or a bunch of elites on their own, generally are countered by the team because it's not that unpredictable. But mix in a dozen or so specials throughout that encounter, and one of them might get their play off. They might get a good firebomb, or a snag a player with a trap, or a burster might detonate on somebody, and that's how you lose the game these days, because players have such crazy defensive layering that it kind of takes a special to upset that balance. So that is why the game is pumping out these specials, is because our players are so powerful, and it's the same across the board. It's why there are so many elites and so many gunners. You'll go into maps, especially if you're a player who's entertaining Auric or Havoc difficulty, you'll go into some maps and it's just absolutely packed with gunners, and you're like, what the hell is this? Well, that's because there are classes in the game that can remove all that stuff pretty easily. And yeah, if you're not playing on one of those, it can feel pretty unfair. But what's a bigger issue than all of these? What's the most impactful thing that happened throughout all of 2025 in terms of enemies and game balance? Well, it was the change to one noble enemy, the Crusher. The Crusher, 2025 was the year of the Crusher, basically. He is a single enemy who is defining more of the meta of the game than any other enemy ever has, basically. And how he's doing this is by being a fully carapace enemy with a lot of HP. And that's it, right? The reason the Crusher is so game defining currently is because he has a full coating of carapace armor. There are many weapons in this game that cannot effectively deal any damage against carapace armor. We're talking single-digit percentage damage against carapace, even with headshots. You are reliant on using at least something in your build to counter the Crusher when he shows up. And when you enter into Heresy difficulty and above, these guys are going to start showing up in more and more numbers. So while you might be fine using just any old weapons at lower difficulties, then you enter into the higher difficulties and these guys will show up and pretty much say, okay, that's it. Playtime is over. It's time to put down the toy guns and pick up the real ones. Because there are guns like the Vigilant Autogun, like the Braced Autogun, the Infantry Las Gun that just cannot hurt this guy at all. Same thing goes for weapons like the Heavy Sword, right? These weapons just cannot hurt the Crusher. It just takes far too much effort to dispatch with one, let alone the 2 or 3 or 5 the game might actually be spawning. And what happened to the Crusher last year was he got a big buff. He got pushed up from, I think it was 3,500 HP to 6,000 HP, almost a double of his HP. Why did Fatshark do this? Well, This was done because the Crusher was not able to accomplish his main goal, which was getting to your team and pushing them off of their position and threatening them with the big atomic overheads. He was simply not surviving the amount of damage that teams can put out. Because the dueling sword was so dominant at the time, he could get poked in the eyeball literally one time by a lot of classes and fall down dead instantly. And that was not great because, yeah, Crusher is supposed to be scary. So they buffed the Crusher's HP and they reduced the power of the dueling sword. This is fine, honestly. Like in a vacuum, this is fine because what it does is it stops the Crushers from dying to, just errant flame staff fire or random grenades from Ogrins who are doing Ogrenheimer, and instead means that you will have to engage them with hand-to-hand most times. However, what this also did is it drove a very hard wedge between the weapons and the classes that can easily handle Crushers and the ones that have a harder time. The ones that were just scraping by before that could kind of deal with him when he was at 3,500 HP have no chance when he's at 6,000 HP. And same thing goes for, classes, right? If you've got classes that work really hard to kill Crushers, let's take, for instance, I think the Arbites is a great example here, right? The Arbites on launch was able to kill Crushers very easily because what he could do is he could run up on a Crusher, he could hit it with his Arbites Maul, he could stagger it, and then he'd hit it like 2 or 3 more times and the Crusher would be dead before it got out of the initial stagger animation. Now, the Crusher survives that initial salvo of attacks and he recovers from the stagger and then he starts swinging at you, which makes him much, much more intimidating. So yeah, you're gonna have to actually manage to dodge and evade these attacks for much longer because he has so much more HP, and that's by intention. That's intentional design. The problem is that for the upper 3 classes, what I so-called the caster classes, they have things built into their kits that still just instantly kill or invalidate Crushers. So for a veteran, encountering 2 Crushers is literally the same as it's ever been, except it's even easier because Crack Grenade's got a sizable buff. So just throw 1 Crack Grenade and you're probably going to kill both of them if they're tightly grouped. Same thing applies for the Hive Scum, right? The Hive Scum has access to the Needle Pistol, which is incredibly effective against these guys. He also has access to the Rocket Launcher in case things get really spicy and there's just too many Crushers afoot. Well, then you pull out the Rocket Launcher and just wipe the slate clean and start over. These classes, by virtue of having counters to Crushers built into their kit, they can choose weapons that might not necessarily be that effective against the Crusher threat. So you can run a Recon Las Gun and a Shock Maul against Crushers on the veteran. Why? Because he doesn't need to manually kill the Crushers like other classes do. He doesn't need to devote one of his weapons to countering this threat. He can throw a Crack Grenade at them instead and then just shout if there's too many and walk away. So you don't have to choose one of the 2 weapon slots in order to counter this singular enemy, which is a ridiculous thing to say right now, but yes, on most builds, on most characters in the game, you will have to choose one of your 2 weapon slots around, do I have a counter to this one specific enemy, especially as you get into higher difficulties, because every other enemy in the game is roughly pretty easy to damage. Just aim at a different spot, using damage over time effects or whatever it might be, right? They're all pretty vulnerable, but this one guy is sort of the litmus test for whether or not your build can kill just him. And if you can't, you're gonna have a train of these guys following you around because they do not they don't spawn them in small numbers on Havoc, because Havoc has bloated numbers for Crusher spawns. So yeah, that is sort of where the enemy meta stands right now. Is we have one guy who is threatening to just completely define what weapons you can and can't bring to games, and I don't love it. But the way around this is to make him have some sort of weakness that is exposed only once he has done a certain number of attacks, or only if you can get in close to him. The thing they're trying to avoid is him getting nuked down from range by like 1 or 2 plasma gun shots, right? They want him to get in close and do his melee attacks, so why not make him vulnerable once he has gotten in close and shows you his back. Maybe the back of his legs or something are weak to attacks. I don't know, but yeah, there needs to be something done about this enemy because it is making it very, very clear that there's a lot of guns in the game, a lot of melee weapons in the game that just can't hang with this sort of design. And I think that's really the biggest thing to talk about with enemies and difficulty here. Let's briefly talk about the difficulty sort of scaling and how I feel like it's doing. I do, as I said earlier, think that Auric is very, very intense right now. However, I think it's a good place to be at. What I'm seeing increasingly as these balance patches roll out and as things get more and more intense on the Havoc front is I would really like to see a separate balance patch for weapons and characters applied to the Havoc game mode specifically than it is in the core, Uprising through Auric game mode. One thing that I think that they have neglected to take into account is that you simply can't have classes that are being balanced around both at the same time because the constraints and the challenges that you'll face in Havoc are not that similar to what you will face in Auric. They are simply sort of a different beast. So if you had a different set of balancing, if you said, oh, on Havoc difficulty, you will have 2 less grenade charges, minimum 1, right? Or or your damage over time effects will be reduced by 50%, right? Really taking the axe to the things that are incredibly powerful. All cooldowns have double the cooldown, right? Ability spam out the window, damage over time effect spam out the window, right? You would have to choose a different set of builds in order to counter that threat. And I think that's totally appropriate to do on Havoc because Havoc difficulty is exclusively populated by people who are attempting this challenge for the pride of having completed the challenge. So if you make it extra hard, then they get to say that they undertook this extra hard challenge and yay for them, right? If you do that to players in the normal game, you're going to make the average player who's playing on the normal difficulties very upset because the game is going to be less fun and less doable. But if you're going to make it difficult, if you're going to tweak the difficulty, do it on Havoc. Make it a Havoc-only balance patch that makes certain things less effective. The overused things should just not work on Havoc, and then there won't be as much discussion, there won't be as much dissatisfaction from the uber try-hard crowd in the game that are, clamoring for certain things to be nerfed because it will be nerfed in the only game mode that they typically play. And I think that would be a good sort of way to also test the balance. Hey, how is this class faring if we nerf this weapon by 50% in Havoc game mode? What do players use instead? And let that sort of shake itself out. I think that'd be a very, very interesting approach, and it remains to be seen if they ever attempt anything like it. So I think that's all I really have to say about enemies and difficulty. Hopefully we get some new enemies this year. I understand that we are getting a new boss fairly soon that was announced recently, so that'll be cool to see. And maybe there are some more to follow that. We will see in due time. But from there, I believe we need to now talk about game modes and how to play the game. Is the game fun right now? What is there to do in the game? Right now, there are 3 main game modes in Darktide. There is the Adventure mode, which I am wrapping the Operations maps, which are shorter maps, into. There is Havoc, which is an endgame Ultra Challenge mode, intentionally hard and painful to play. And then finally, there is Mortis Trials. And perhaps there's something else coming called Expeditions, but we don't know what that is just yet. The Mortis Trials game mode, let's go ahead and talk about that first, because the Mortis Trials game mode is more or less a dead end. It never has amounted to anything in so far, right? It is a roguelike-ish experience where you get power-ups as you progress through 12 stages, and even on the highest possible difficulty, it doesn't really amount to much of a challenge or much of an event at all. A lot of this comes down to the fact that you are just sitting in one room, experiencing a wave-based challenge, and that's it. That's kind of it. It's fun, but it doesn't have any greater scope, and you don't really feel like you're growing towards any given thing. It feels oftentimes very predictable what sort of things you'll end up with, and then just end up rolling the game. So I'm certain there are players out there who enjoy it. I do enjoy it in small amounts, but this game mode, it is a distillation, or it's a tiny piece of what used to be called Chaos Waste in Vermintide 2, and this game mode, it takes some elements of that, but it just is too small a vertical slice to be enjoyable. I think that those small levels should be turned, this game mode could be turned into like actually exploring an environment and going through a level with those magic powers. And if you had that sort of stuff at your disposal, it would be very fun to play the game with those magic powers, to play the normal game with those magic powers. I think that the main constraint on this game mode, the reason it isn't as fun as it could be, is because we aren't getting to play the game as designed. Darktide is not designed to be a siege mode game. It is where you're sitting in one place and letting the enemies come to you. It's designed to be a game where you adventure through the map and assault enemies where they're at, and then get to ambushed as you progress. And that would be a much more whole experience. I would really love to see those two married together. A normal level where you get power ups as you pass certain thresholds in the map. As you kill a boss, you'll get a power-up. As you clear the midway event, you'll get a power-up, right? Those sort of things would be incredible as an alternate game mode. But if this is not what Expeditions ends up being, then at this point, I'd have to say probably not great, because we'll have like 7 game modes available in Darktide, and that'll split the player base far too far. About the default game mode, this year, or 2025, also saw the addition of the campaign, which is a way for new players to be introduced somewhat to the story and to be walked through the escalating power level of enemies. I think this is really interesting. When I noticed how this was working, basically when you start out a new character now, you can choose to play the campaign. It'll introduce you to sort of the concepts of what each map and what the goal of each map is, and it does some narrative tie-ins to put them all together and try to weave that plot thread that Darktide is oftentimes very slowly lacking. But additionally, it also slow walks the enemies you'll encounter. So in early missions, you will only encounter the, I believe it's the Dreg enemies. You won't encounter anything scary like Crushers or Maulers. You're only up against the smallest enemies because you're in the lowest difficulties. And then you'll start to encounter those Crushers and Maulers, but only after that will you ever see your first boss. So bosses and the like will only start to be introduced to the game after you've passed a certain threshold, which I think is a pretty cool design. It sort of introduces you to a few enemies at a time and walks you forward. It would be interesting as well if they could experiment with they are trying to, I guess, kind of experiment with unlocking certain weapons through mastery, which we'll talk about in a second when we talk about the miscellaneous stuff. But I think that's a good way of making use of the maps that they currently have. I understand that there are limitations. They're not going to like fully voice act and like animate all these cutscenes, so they made do with what they had. And I think it's definitely a better new player experience and introduction than what they had before, which was just literally throwing you to the wolves and saying, hey, go play games, and you'll level up, I guess. So that's it. That's been a big improvement. We have also seen the release of 2 what are called operations maps. Actually, I believe only one of them came out in 2025, but these operations maps, I don't know if they're going to double down on this or if this is going to be a thing they're going to continue with, but operations maps are slightly shorter default maps. They are, I believe, quick playable if you go to the main mission, and you can quick play into them on occasion, but there are very few of them as compared to the whole of the normal size maps. And the most recent one to be released, No Man's Land, was very well received. Very beautiful map. A lot of detail went into it, and it's the first truly outdoors map in Darktide, which I think is really impressive. The conceit of it is like that we are making our way through the map with this tank, and we're looking for coordinates to some sort of heretic base. I think it's pretty cool. I think it leads to a lot of potential plot lines. Remains to be seen if they explore anything on that this year. But the shortness of the map, it really isn't to its detriment. I think there is a place in Darktide for these shorter style of maps, as long as they are included within quick play with everything else, right? These shorter operations maps will never be in the Havoc game mode, because Havoc has to balance all the maps against each other. You don't want to get easy wins because you got a really short map that you don't have to withstand too much stuff to get through. But on the regular mission board, hey, you know what? It's a nice shake up to the pace to occasionally have a little 10, 15-minute mission instead of a 30 to 40-minute mission for a lot of players. And I don't think they'd be too upset about getting them, so as long as they retain some pretty high quality like the No Man's Land map has. And in terms of other maps, we didn't see really anything at all last year. We had, there's just the operations with No Man's Land and then the Mortis Trials maps, which I'm not really considering maps at all. Hopefully, fingers crossed, guys, that this year we see lots of maps and map-based content in Darktide, because there was literally none outside of No Man's Land for the entirety of 2025, which paints a pretty bleak picture. Either they have given up on that, or they're like stockpiling something, which maybe is just a little bit of a hopium from my part. But, you know, Darktide, especially if you've seen the last few maps that have been released, can be very beautiful, and I do trust their level designers to produce something really good if they are indeed still working on Darktide. But that is one of those things where I was talking earlier and saying the game is on that cusp of making a decision. Are we just going to be rolling out one map a year, or are we stockpiling and we're going to be seeing a lot of maps and a lot of content, like actual playable content for the game this year? That is going to be revealed to us hopefully very, very soon. And I think that's really all I have to say about the game modes and the way the game is played and how fun it is right now. You know, many of you might be getting into Havoc. Havoc is a mess, right? It's just a mess. I suppose that I've talked about that at length in other videos in the past. I don't feel like a super high need to get into it here, but yeah, it's a mess. It's its own sort of ecosystem, distinct from the normal game. The rotating mutators are not that fun, and they're not equivalent, and it's an absolute crapshoot what you'll get in any given game. It's a mess, but it's my mess, right? I end up playing it a lot of times just because I like that intense challenge. So if that sounds like it's for you, then you should probably go check out Havoc, although it does require a party, which is, you know, sucks pretty bad. Okay, let's move on from here and wrap up this discussion by talking about everything else there is to talk about. I'm just going to go through basically my mental image of everything that's in the Morningstar that there is to do. Let's start with our own character and leveling and all that stuff. Leveling got a big overhaul this year in terms of how you progress if you're making a new character. If you continue to win games and never lose games, you will progress your leveling much more quickly. I think that's great. It cuts the leveling process down. I was leveling from 0 to 30 in like somewhere around like 4 to 5 hours, which is way better than the previous like 6 or 7, maybe even 8 hours it was taking me to do this. The progression system for getting to new difficulties is also gated differently now. You will have to complete a certain number of missions of a lower difficulty in order to progress the bar and unlock the next one. It's no longer gated to your level, which I think is a great design. Is some players, no matter what level they are not going to be ready for Heresy. They're not going to be ready for Damnation. They're certainly not going to be ready for Auric, right? So if you're a player who just doesn't have the faculties and the capability of beating, you know, regularly this many Damnation games, well, then you're just not going to unlock Auric. It's just, you're just not ready for it. And what the system does is as you win games, it builds up this bar, but if you lose games, it removes progress from the bar. I think there is a bias towards winning. You know, if you win more often, or if you win sequential times, it adds up more. But if you lose sequential times, it doesn't reduce it by more. So you will, if you're losing and winning equally, eventually you will unlock all the difficulties. But if you're losing more than you're winning, you are never going to unlock the next difficulty, which I think is fine, right? Keeping players out of those difficulties, it's a much better signpost for what players should be doing than it was previously, where it was just unlocked at a certain level. Because what you'd see is players who were at level 17 and had unlocked Damnation, I believe that's where it unlocked, and were just immediately queuing into Damnation, and they were by no means at all ready for that level of difficulty because they had barely played the game at all. So now you will have to put in a lot more games if you aren't just sequentially winning every single game because you're experienced Smurf. So that's the leveling process. Masteries are pretty similar. I like where masteries are at. I like the idea You know, the whole idea behind the mastery system and the crafting system currently is that if you equip a weapon and you play with it for a certain number of games, I think it's about 7 games or so, you will have maxed out the quote unquote mastery for that weapon. And it's dependent on what difficulty you take on, of course. But then you will be able to unlock whatever blessings and the perks you want and empower the weapon fully. It just then requires resources to do that. Resources these days are not that hard to come by. You'll get tons of them if you do Havoc, and we'll talk about incentive structures in a second. But yeah, the ability to just instantly go and get a version of your weapon that you want from the commissary or whatever it's called, the requisition guy, and then just craft it to be a perfect weapon, I think is great in some regards, but it is also very lacking in the chase, right? Currently in Darktide, as I was about to say a second ago, there isn't a whole lot of incentive structure to play the game outside of the sheer moment-to-moment enjoyment of playing the game. You don't play Havoc to get, well, I guess you can play it to get like certain titles or whatever, but once you've done it one time, you know, you want to just keep doing it because it's a fun challenge. It's a fun game to play actively, and it's to get better and feel more skilled at. The real lacking thing for a lot of players, and the reason players fall off of the game, is because there is no chase, there is no grind. Some players will get addicted to grinding the penances, but I feel like there should be some sort of gear chase, and now that it has almost all been removed, there really is no way to distinguish your characters. I think one thing that a lot of players have yearned for a very, very long time, since the Vermintide 2 days, is a return of the quote-unquote red weapons from Vermintide 2, which had unique skins which glowed, and in order to get those weapons, you needed to play and win a lot of Legend games or Cataclysm games where you would get the highest reward chest, and then you had a certain percentage chance to get them in there. And farming and trying to get the one that you wanted for the weapons that you use on each of your classes was something to do, right? It was something very challenging to do, and it was very cool when you saw someone who actually, you know, they had the blue weapons, they had the shiny red weapons, so you knew that they meant business. They played with that weapon a lot, and that is something that I do miss a lot about Vermintide 2, is having those hallmarks, those signposts on your character that say, hey, I have played with this character a lot, I've got this weapon, and you know, you should take me seriously. I think that sort of stuff, progression based gear and stuff that you can show off to other characters, they have dabbled in it. They've got the Havoc sets, they've got a few achievement based sets that characters can get that you'll see and be like, oh, that guy's got like this border. He's got the 1,000,000 kills border. You know, that guy's got Poxbreaker as the title. You know, he doesn't mess around, right? That is the sort of stuff that keeps players playing the game, that keeps players interested and keeps them coming back. And so if they can put effort into creating more frames, more titles, more insignias, more cosmetics in the game, or whatever it is that you know, sort of telegraphs to other players that, hey, I play the game a lot, you'll get more players who are prideful and who want to play the game a lot. And those are your core players, especially in a game like Darktide, which really, really relies on its core, you know, never turn off the game players to survive, you know, through month to month. So that's how I feel about the crafting system. Since I mentioned penances and progression, the penance track hasn't seen a boost to its offerings in a very, very long time. I'm certain that this is the achievement system, by the way, I'm certain that they have numbers on this, and it's probably because they looked at their overall numbers for players and said, okay, well, like 2% of people have the top of the penance track completed. It's not a good use of our time to continue to invest resources in developing more penance challenges and more rewards for the penances, because people aren't even going to get them because there's that few people doing it. But, you know, out of the vast majority of people that play, the people that are constantly playing, that are returning to your microtransaction shop, etc., those are your players who have maxed out the penance track, and there hasn't been anything new for them to do in quite a while. Hasn't been any new rewards, even though you've been adding new penances through Hive Scum and Mortis Trials and stuff like that, hasn't been any new rewards added. So it'd be very high time to see something new added this year. And what I'd love to see is something akin to what Warframe does. There are certain cosmetics and insignias and stuff that grow and become more elaborate, and you can demonstrate that, oh shit, that guy has this many achievement points. That guy has this many completions of like this boss or whatever. I think RuneScape has similar things where you'll see like badges on players if they've completed a boss like 1,000 times or something crazy like that. But those sort of things are the sort of chase things that players need to incentivize themselves metagame to keep them coming back day in and day out. So if you want players to do the penances, give them more cool stuff that occurs at the very top end of the track. Okay. And then we talked about penances. We've only got a couple of little stores left, which is mostly talking about cosmetics. Let's briefly stop here on cosmetics. Cosmetics are in a weird state. I don't know how much to talk about cosmetics, because I understand that a lot of that is just not really in the hands of the developers. It seems pretty pointed that we have never received any cosmetic updates for the Arbites. I like to think that the same thing won't happen for Hive Scum, but I don't have any guarantees there that we will ever get anything for the Hive Scum. The other characters, they do have a few free looks that are available in the from completing Havoc mode, from buying the gear from the shop guy who's over there by the microtransaction store, and I think there's probably like a couple other ways you can get it, but achievement unlocks through the penance track system, of course. But the vast majority of looks come from the microtransaction store, the premium store these days. And that is, I'm certain, by design. I am almost certain that they have been told, okay, like, you need to produce this many of these cosmetics per whatever. And they probably just don't have the time to go about making stuff for being given away for free. I don't hate the monetization, the price point necessarily. I think it's fine, right? I haven't ever been like, oh dang, like, this is way too expensive. But that again might just be me having been stewed in a culture of like Path of Exile level microtransactions. I understand Path of Exile is a free-to-play game, but like chest armors in that game are $30 alone, versus I can spend about $12 or $15 and get a full outfit in Darktide, which I think is reasonable for something that you are you're only playing that character for hours and like hundreds of hours. And weapon skins, which are the only thing you can generally see because Darktide is a first-person game, are like on the order of about $5 or something like that. So I think that's an appropriate price. In terms of the rotation, we did get a big improvement this year. If you are from years back, if you remember the store, it used to be really paltry offerings, like one outfit, and then it would have like 2 weapons and then a headgear on the side panel. And that was really bad. Like you could have almost zero chance of seeing anything you wanted. In the weeks past, in the months past, the offerings have been doubled. So there's actually 2 full outfits that are released every 2 weeks with 6 or it's like either 8 or 6 accessories attached to it per class for the 4 base classes. And I think that's a good amount. Tons of players will continue to say that we need to have a open free-for-all sort of shop where you can buy whatever you want. I just want to be realistic and say I just don't think that is ever going to happen. I believe that is something that has been told to them specifically. This is the structure the microtransaction shop must follow because of their corporate partners. So that is my understanding as far as that goes. So that's why I don't belabor it too much. I don't gripe about it too much in the videos, because it's nothing that Fatshark could ever change, even if they wanted to. So yeah, that's where microtransactions stand. And let's wrap up, I suppose, here. What's left to talk about? Well, okay, let's talk Fatshark. We'll stick this at the end of the video so that the Fatshark doesn't watch this far. I can just say whatever I want. I'm just gonna trash him I'm just gonna absolutely shit talk them for like an hour here. Yeah, you thought this video was almost over. No, it goes on for another hour. No, I'm just kidding. Let's be honest about Fatshark though. Let's say like what they're doing that's good, what they're doing that's bad, and sort of what they have to figure out for this year that's gonna potentially like what could screw this game or what could potentially like really boost this game. I'm gonna start here with just a nice little constructive criticism shit sandwich where, you know, one good thing, one bad thing, one good thing to wrap it up. The good thing that they've done so far that gives me some faith is that they did have a pretty productive 2025 as compared to 2024. 2024 seemed like the game was like kind of in scramble to survive mode where they were like just getting the basic functions of the game figured out. 2025 seemed like they actually started to create new things for the game. Like we had 2 new classes and they got all the old classes squared away, had a new game mode with Mortis Trials, which, you know, it's whatever, but yeah, really like creating these new classes. And they wrapped the year and they're coming into this year saying that they're already ready pretty much to release the next new class. It really does seem like they're quite ambitious about their development plans for this year. We'll see if those shake out. But yeah, it seems like they're scaling up their efforts towards this game, which I think is good because the game is not dead, but it would have been dead if they hadn't had a good 2025, to be honest. Okay, so that's one good thing. One bad thing though here is honestly, like I understand that there is development timelines for everything, but Fatshark really seems to be absolutely strapped for time. They just don't seem to get that much done in any given content cycle. And I know that there is a lot of hoop jumping that they go through, right? They have to run any new ideas by all of their corporate masters and overlords. They have to, go through rounds of balancing and testing and patching and all that sort of stuff. And they've made good strides in the right direction. It's just that there are, as I've made in a recent video talking about the things that could potentially kill Darktide, there is a huge amount of, and thank you, my audience, for giving me the correct terminology, the correct verbiage to talk about this. If I could even talk. Technical debt in the game, right? There are so many jank systems and broken things that they are just not able to invest the time to go back and tackle and iron all of these bugs out, that the game is increasingly having more and more of these buggy, like, oh, it's just like that. Demon hosts just be clipping through the floor. It's just sometimes you're just going to 2014 out of a game. It's just sometimes you're going to error code 3006 and crash your desktop, right? Those sort of things. And I don't know whether that's just part of the engine that you can't escape, because I understand that Helldivers 2 has similar like fucked up issues. But yeah, the amount of technical debt the game has and the amount of jank shit is ever accruing as we're pushing for new types of content. And I think that all just goes back to the fact that they just don't have enough like development going on in the game at any given time. There's stuff that for instance, and I don't mean this to throw this in their face, but I had to talk to the person that I talked to about being a content creator and say, hey, this thing with the bursters, they definitely didn't used to hit you from this radius. Can you take a look at this? And she got a dev to look at it specifically, and within 2 or 3 days time, they'd found the problem and then it was patched out. And like the fact that that can be done, the fact that that could probably be done for things like the fact that bursters just walk into your face and refuse to explode, right? The demon hosts clip through floors, that all these rituals are buggy, right? But it would require one specific dev sitting down and working on that. Versus I don't know what they're doing the rest of the time, right? They're just being like, it feels like sometimes that the ship is just kind of like being told, sail in that direction, where if they just had 1 or 2 people whose full-time job it was to just go through and like assassinate bugs, it would be amazing. But this all kind of like makes me very apprehensive. I know I said this would be like a shit sandwich and I'd wrap it up with a compliment, but it's a double decker, like double stuffed Oreos. This is a double stuffed shit sandwich. So let me double down on the amount of negative here. It feels like to me sometimes that Fatshark is running with a skeleton crew on Darktide, and this year, this is what I was saying, the best of worst outcomes. this year is going to tell us whether that is the case, right? If this year goes back to pretty much status quo of what we had last year, and we don't receive any scaling up of what a grand reveal of, oh, this is what we've been working on, and here's all this stuff, we're just going to roll it out. It's going to be a chock full year. It feels like to me they're scaling down their efforts, because if we're not making new maps, then what are we doing? It feels like they might be shipping people off to go work on their next game or something. So yeah, that is my real fear, is the reason things aren't getting done is because we're working with far less people than we would think for a company who has like 120 to 150 employees. Okay, and let's wrap it up. I mean, let's close the shit sandwich. Let's not leave it open-faced, and say that I do, again, have hope for this coming year. I think one thing that players are really, really clamoring for is new map content. And the map design that we saw demonstrated in No Man's Land at the end of last year was impeccable. The environments and the lighting and the way the game looks is really beautiful at times, and they are doing a really good job. I think that even though they haven't released a whole lot of maps in recent memory, the maps have only had increasing quality over time as you get through them. More interesting places to engage enemies, just better looking and just more well thought out, well designed encounters and maps. So good marks there, and that's the sort of thing that I hope to see a return to form in for 2026. Outside of that, Fatshark is a strange company. I just can't. It's a hard company to get your head around, because I think that they design their game in a way that it is. It has an appeal. It has a specific appeal to people who will get autistically fixated on that. I mean that in the best possible way. But there are a certain percentage of players, myself included, who are going to get absolutely hyper fixated on Darktide for a very, very long time, right? They will put the thousands of hours into the game and they won't even question it, because it just enraptures them that much. They'll want to know everything about everything, absorb every system. This is like the game for them. It has that immaculate game feel, but at the same time, the way the game is developed and paced, it seems to appeal much more to players who are playing casually for a few weekends a month, right? I have said this many, many times, but I do feel that if this game was like, if I engaged with this game, like every 3 months, I would play it for like 2 weeks straight, I would have a great experience with Darktide all the time, because the new content that comes out every 3 months is really cool. You get to experience new characters, you get to play around with your new builds, and then it kind of, loses its shine, and then Fatshark goes into hibernation for the next couple months, and you come back and you get a whole new thing to experiment with. And so I like that. It's kind of like a boom and a bust cycle. It's not great for content creation or anything like that. And it's not great for players who are addicted and want to play all the time. But I also understand that there are realistic, limits to, they can't just patch every single week. Although I really wish they would continue to, balance change and patch change every single week, get some bugs ironed out. They've been doing better with that in last year. So yeah, that's the overarching feel I have about Fatshark. It's like, it feels like they are a company who's developing a game for like casual normal play, but they have happened to stumble upon a recipe that addicts people and makes them want to play for thousands of hours. And then if you are addicted, it just sucks because you're waiting on them for far too long. And yeah, that's what I have to say. Hopefully that wasn't too rude to them. Cool. Let's end the video, I guess. I mean, what do you guys think? Let me know in the description. How do you feel about Darktide right now? How do you feel about Fatshark? Personally, this is my overarching thought. To close it back out, they always say to restate your thesis statement at the end of your essay. 2026 is going to tell us a lot, right? If 2026 goes hard right from moment one, if we see this new content, whatever it is, here at the end of March, and then in less than 3 months' time, we get a turnaround and we get the reveal at Skulls of our new 7th class and its AdMech, and that comes with its own host of content and new maps. If we get a new enemy faction this year, like those sort of things would be groundbreaking for Darktide. And I think there's still a lot of life in this game. Like this game is not dead by any means, and it is really like for as for as hard as I can be on it sometimes, the game is in good shape. Like players pick up this game and they love the game. There's so much to do. It's incredibly fun to learn and master. It's just like once you start to get down to the fine grain of things, it's like a nice table, right? Like this game has a very pleasant aesthetic to it. It feels like it's mostly sturdy. It's got a kind of like a wobbly leg to it. But then you run your hand across the surface of the table and you feel some imperfections in there. And like if you weren't a person who is playing the game all the time, you would never notice this imperfections. You'd be like, whatever, it's a table. But when you are like touching the table all the time, you start to feel those imperfections and they start to really irritate you. And you're like, fuck, someone give me some fucking sandpaper and I'll go fix it myself, right? I'm gonna go create a mod that'll fix this shit for them. Like that's the sort of thing that starts to crop up in your mind. But that might just be me literally losing my mind, and that happens when you're at the end of like a 2-hour yap session. But there you go, guys. So thank you for watching the video. Thank you to all of you who somehow made it to here. Maybe you fell asleep. Night, sweet dreams if you are asleep currently. Love you. But if you aren't asleep, thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe, maybe become a member if you're literally that devoted. I mean, shit. You're a legend if you made it this far. And I guess I'll see you next year for the next one. Stay of the game, guys. Hopefully this week we're receiving some news about the new update. Fingers crossed. And Mr. E out of here. Bye-bye.